Imagine a time when nearly every movie that came out of Hollywood had to pass an invisible test. A time when studios avoided certain stories, not because of written law, but because of fear, pressure, and quiet government influence. In the mid-20th century, Washington didn't need to outlaw controversial ideas. It simply made sure that film studios, networks, and artists chose not to express them. Today, we're looking at how the U.S. government, without any formal legislation, managed to gain a near total grip on the creative industries and how that shaped the movies, TV, and culture we still live with today. In the late 1940s, the United States was entering a new kind of war, one fought with ideas as much as weapons. The fear of communism was spreading, and Congress wanted to prove it was doing something about it. That's where the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, came in. The HUAC didn't create a law to enforce against communist ideology on TV or in film, and there was nothing illegal about writing a script with social themes or expressing personal beliefs. But what the HUAC did have was power, the power of publicity and fear. When they hauled Hollywood screenwriters and actors into televised hearings and demanded they name names, studios panicked. They didn't want to be accused of harboring traitors, so, without any law requiring it, studios voluntarily blacklisted hundreds of writers, directors, and performers. They couldn't work under their own names, and some never worked again. This was the start of the Hollywood blacklist, one of the most effective forms of censorship in American history, even though it was completely unofficial. But the roots of this control went back even earlier. Starting in the 1930s, Hollywood already had its own system of self-censorship, the Motion Picture Production Code, often called the HAYS Code. The HAYS Code wasn't a federal law either. It was an agreement among the studios to keep movies morally pure, banning profanity, sexual content, even criticism of religion or the military. Why did studios agree? Simple, they were terrified of government regulation and public outrage. By creating their own code, they could tell politicians, "Don't worry, we'll police ourselves." And it worked. For over 30 years, no official censor's office was needed. Hollywood censored itself far more strictly than any law ever could. When the Cold War paranoia arrived, that same mindset, keep the government happy, avoid controversy, made the industry easy to control through political pressure alone. But there was another, quieter form of control: cooperation. Since World War II, the U.S. military has had an office that works directly with filmmakers called the Department of Defense Entertainment Liaison Office. If a studio wanted access to aircraft, tanks, or military bases, it needed the Pentagon's approval. And that approval came with strings attached. Scripts had to be reviewed, and anything that portrayed the U.S. military negatively could be changed or denied cooperation. So if a movie wanted to show a rebellious general, a military blunder, or the horror of civilian casualties, that scene often disappeared before filming even began. Again, there was no law forcing this, just a system of incentives. You could make an anti-war movie if you wanted, but it would cost you millions more because you'd have to build your own sets and rent your own planes. Most studios chose the cheaper path, cooperation. That's why from the 1950s through the 1980s, most big war movies carried the same tone: heroic, sanitized, patriotic. It wasn't until films like Apocalypse Now and Platoon, which were made with little or no Pentagon help, that audiences saw a very different picture of war. Back in the HUAC era, the fear went far beyond politics. Studios didn't just blacklist communists, they blacklisted anyone who seemed uncooperative. The Hollywood 10, a group of writers and directors who refused to testify, were jailed for contempt of Congress. Their punishment sent a clear message: if you don't play along, you're finished. The ripple effect spread through television, radio, and even publishing. Networks canceled programs with questionable hosts or guests, and publishers dropped manuscripts that might be interpreted as critical of American values. And because none of this came from an actual law, there was no clear point of resistance. You couldn't challenge it in court. It was all done through fear, reputation, and compliance. During World War II, the U.S. government directly partnered with Hollywood through the Office of War Information, or OWI. The OWI didn't ban movies, it simply offered guidelines for what patriotic films should look like. Filmmakers were encouraged to emphasize unity, downplay racial tensions, and avoid anything that could damage morale. After the war, the OWI dissolved, But its methods didn't disappear. Instead, they evolved into a permanent relationship between government and entertainment. The CIA even got involved, secretly funding magazines, art exhibitions, and international film projects to promote Western ideals during the Cold War. So while Americans were watching cowboy heroes and military blockbusters, the same government agencies were helping shape what American culture looked like at home and abroad. Why did so many powerful people in Hollywood go along with this? Part of it was fear. No one wanted to be accused of being un-American, but part of it was profit. The government and the studios had a mutually beneficial arrangement. The government got movies that supported national ideals and military recruitment, and the studios got access, funding, and protection from moral or political backlash. It was the ultimate unspoken deal, censorship by cooperation. And because there was no formal law to repeal, it lingered long after the Cold War began to fade. By the 1960s and 70s, cracks began to appear. The counterculture and Vietnam War brought new filmmakers who wanted to challenge authority, not glorify it. The old HAYS Code collapsed in 1968, replaced by the MPAA rating system, and that change finally gave directors more freedom to tackle taboo subjects. But even then, the relationship between Hollywood and government never fully disappeared. It just became more subtle. Today, the Pentagon still reviews and approves scripts for movies that want military cooperation. Intelligence agencies like the CIA have their own entertainment offices, and while the blacklist is long gone, the lesson remains. The most effective control isn't enforced by law. It's enforced by access, by incentives, and by fear of losing them. So the next time you watch an old war movie, or even a modern blockbuster that thanks the Department of Defense in the credits, remember, creative freedom in America has never been absolute. It has always operated in negotiation with power. And for decades, that power didn't need to impose rules. It simply convinced the storytellers to tell the right kind of stories. And that, maybe, is the most effective kind of censorship, the kind you hardly notice. Thank you all for watching the video, and if you enjoyed this kind of content, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate the support.